and I'm a Business Central consultant. And I have been doing that for approximately 5 years. I started out as a freelancer, and now I work for a Microsoft Gold partner based in Scotland called Kick ICT. Prior to that, I was a bookseller for 30 years, starting off bookselling on the shop floor in a shop in London, and ended up as managing director and sort of de facto finance director for a wholesale book company based in Edinburgh in Scotland, where I now live. And I did a wee stint in library services and various other things as well, but good times. And I suspect I'm the only Business Central consultant with a theatre studies degree. And if there are any others out there, then do let me know, because we can then have lovely chat later on. So, intercompany setup and operation. So, intercompany functionality in Business Central is designed to allow transactions to run smoothly between different companies on the same database without having to key documents at both ends. So what you do is create a sale in one company, and then via all manner of setup in the middle, that is automatically going to create a purchase in the other company. Now, it's one of those things in Business Central where you don't do it every day, and it's big and messy and complicated. And because you don't do it every day, like the kind of normal sales tasks that you do or the normal purchase tasks that you might do, it's not easy to remember. And so you nearly always have to go and look it up. So hopefully this will be one of those things that will aid you to do it in the odd events that you do have to do it. Now, about 99% of it is set up in order to make sure you get it right. And the remaining 1% is doing it. And the 1% of doing it is really just creating a purchase invoice or a sales invoice or a journal or an order in one company, hitting post, and that pretty much is it. And the system will look after everything else for you, provided it's set up properly. There's a lot of elements there, but there's only really one guiding principle to it. And that guiding principle is pairs. So in your sending company, you'll have a certain amount of setup. That setup needs to be mirrored exactly in the receiving company. So each pair of companies are partners together, and you need to make sure that the setup is identical in both. And the analogy I like to use is the 3-pin plug and the 2-pin socket. So if you've got a gadget with a 3-pin plug and you want it to work, you need a 3-pin socket to plug it into. If you're in the situation that this poor chap is in here, then you stand absolutely no chance at all, and nothing's going to work properly for you. So let's dive into the elements. So you have, for each set of transactions, you've got two companies. You have a sending company, and you've got a receiving company. And in each of those, on the company information, you need to set an intercompany code. So what I would recommend is you use something like your display name or some other form of code that is well recognized and that people use on a daily basis. What you really want to do is make sure that that is unique. So if you're in a situation where you've got multiple companies, you don't want to be replicating any of these, or you'll cause all kinds of havoc. So here we are. I've got a UK company set up, which is the one in the red outline, and you've got an intercompany partner code set there. So there's your intercompany partner code for them. And then I've got a oh, won't let you do a pointer, will it? No, you do a pointer and scroll. That's annoying. And then I've got an EU company set up, and the intercompany partner code for the EU company is there. And there are a variety of other things on here, which I'll cover off at a later point in time. So having set up your intercompany partner code, you then need to set up the intercompany partner at each side of the transaction. So the intercompany partner is an entity within Business Central that controls how transactions either being sent or received are handled. So you've got a variety of different fields here. So you've got your intercompany code, and that's the code that you've set on your company information card. You've got some currency code. I've not dived into currency here because I want to try and keep it relatively simple, but the currency portion of it works in exactly the same way as it works in the rest of Business Central. The issue will be with currency. If you're doing regular currency updates in terms of valuations, you need to make sure that the valuations are the same on both sides of the transaction. Otherwise, you could find yourself drifting out of balance. You've got a transfer type of database here, and that defaults to database because that's allowing you to transact between two companies sitting on the same database. It is possible to transact between two Business Central companies in different databases, and you'd normally do that by either email or file transfer. And there's a different setting for that, which I can show you later on. This thing here, the auto accept transactions, what that does is that enables you to automatically accept any intercompany transaction that's being sent to you, so that it will just appear in either your unposted purchase invoices or your unposted sales invoices, depending on which way around it's going. And again, we'll go through that again in a minute. There's another setting elsewhere which auto sends to. So it really depends on how you want to manage that within your organization, whether you want things to sit in an intercompany inbox prior to being sent, or whether you want it just to go, and whether you want it to sit in an intercompany inbox when it's arriving, or whether you want to just automatically receive it. And then, so here we are in our UK company here. We've set up a customer for our EU company because we're going to be selling to them. And over on the other side, in our EU company, we've got our intercompany partner set up for the UK, and we've got a vendor set up for the UK. And obviously, if we want to transact in both, the auto send part of it. So if you want it to automatically send, you need to tag this. And this is an intercompany setup. And I will, again, when we go through the demo, I'll show you that. So as I've just mentioned, we need a customer and a vendor on each side of the fence. So we need a customer in our sending company because we're selling them a service, and we need a vendor in our receiving company because we're buying the service from our partner. So you set up your customer card as per normal, except that you fill in the intercompany code on this field here. And then you've got an equivalent vendor on the other side of the fence. And again, you set up the intercompany partner code for the vendor there. And I've used a kind of a numbering protocol that enables me to easily identify where these are coming from. And I stole that from one of my customers, so more of whom later on. And obviously, if you're trading back and forth, you can do this vice versa. You set up a customer on both sides and a vendor on both sides, and that enables you to buy and sell from both ends of the operation. Okay, so that's all fairly static setup. Chart of accounts, and this is where things start getting a little bit gnarly. So I'll try and step through this relatively slowly if I can, and again I'll show you a bit more of this later in the demo. So the intercompany chart of accounts is really a mapping table that is shared between the partners, and you are agreeing a set of GL codes that you're going to use. Because you might be in a scenario where you don't have identical charts of accounts on both sides of the fence. So if you have two companies, one of whom has bought another company, has bought the second company, and they've got completely different structure, you need to agree a standard chart of accounts that you're going to use, and then you can map to that from both ends of the transaction. And then that intercompany chart of accounts will govern how you post documents that are being sent and received. So I'll try and cover that off as clearly as I can. So I've recorded this because I don't like stepping through it in public because it's complicated. So you can go to your intercompany chart of accounts, it's blank, and you can copy directly from the chart of accounts, and that just populates the whole thing automatically. And then you can map to the account with the same number. So you can create it fairly easily. And you may want to edit it down. You can create it for a single line like I've shown there, or you can select all the lines and map it that way. like so. So yeah, and then the rest of me is just that's the rest of me is just faffing around there. So the way it works is like this. So as I just said, you will be potentially mapping to different GL amounts. So you've got your agreed numbers here, and then let's say company A has a GL where sales is 1001. You would put that as your GL account number there. So in company A, you've got your intercompany chart of accounts, the same as everybody else, but the GL account number you're mapping to is this one. Company B, similarly, you might have a different GL account for sales, and so you're mapping to that one. Company C, again, another account number, but you're mapping to it, and you're retaining this consistent intercompany chart of accounts between the three. And this import-export feature here allows you to set this up in one company, export it, and then have it in, and then import it into all the other companies that you're in partnership with. Okay, when you are the selling company and you are wanting your transaction to go from, for example, in this scenario, a service that you're selling on a sales invoice, so you're using a sales GL account code, but when it goes to the intercompany partner, it's going to be a purchase code. You then map that to the intercompany GL account, so you're mapping it to one of these, but lower down. And that way, when it passes through the intercompany chart of accounts, it's going to get mapped to that and then pick up any code that is mapped to in the receiving company. So I'll try and explain that again, again using my kind of cartoon-like PowerPoint. So you've got your first step is you've got your sales invoice that you're creating at one end, and that's got your sales GL account that is set in your sending company, in our UK company. And here's our GL for it. It's got that 10100 account number. And then here's the intercompany chart of account number that we're mapping it to. So we're saying that when we're making that sale to this partner, the intercompany chart of account code that we want to make that sale to is going to be this. And this is the one that's going to create the purchase. We're going to have a purchase created to this code. In the receiving company then, they receive the transaction and it has this code on it already. It then passes through the intercompany chart of accounts and picks up the code it's mapped to. So let's say they're using this code to account for the maintenance work that's getting done for them. And that will then create this purchase invoice with that code on it. So as you can see, that's fiddly. But once you've set it up, that's it done. It's finished, and you don't have to worry about it again. You just transact, and it will do all these things for you automatically. But it requires a bit of concentration, a bit of careful stepping through, and bearing in mind these four steps in the process to understand what it's actually doing. And finally, let's not forget our dear friends dimensions from our previous session. Intercompany dimensions work in very much the same way. There isn't a shared intercompany dimension set, but the way in which you load them is very much the same. And as we can see here, we're going to populate our intercompany dimensions by copying them from the dimensions. And then we're going to select all of them and map them to the dimension codes. There you go. And then if we look into that intercompany dimension, we'll see that the intercompany dimension values are set on the right-hand side there. And obviously you can choose whatever codes you want to go on the right-hand side. And that will be your sending transaction. Your sending transaction will use that set of codes to send out. Okay, and then you can map the dimensions to the intercompany dimensions. This is still in the sending company. So having created your intercompany dimension codes, you're now going to map your dimensions to them. And again, it's just as straightforward as that. And that will then create the dimension value, the intercompany dimension values within the dimensions as well. So there you can see them all set up there. So it's relatively straightforward. So when you're sending it, it's going to be based on these values here in the sending company. And when you receive it, it'll be based on these values here in the receiving company. Okay, so it's gone too far. Let's get on to our demo then. So what I've set up is Kronos having two companies, a UK company and an EU company. And the UK company, the EU company has a contract with engineers from the UK company who do repair works on their properties. And management don't want to be keying invoices at both ends. They want to use the intercompany functionality within Business Central to have that keyed once by the UK company and then picked up as a purchase by the EU company. So let me see if I can drag across my demo. Bear with me a second. I'm hoping you can see this. Wait a sec. Okay. Okay, can you see?
Yeah. Yes, we can stop. We can see a little bit of, there we go. We can see your full window now. Thank you.
Fantastic. Good. Thank you for that feedback. I was just slightly concerned that because I wasn't doing it the way I'd done it previously, it wouldn't show up. Okay, so we've got a UK company there and an EU company there. And this is just based in a sandbox that I've got. What I've done is I have, so if we just have a quick look at the intercompany partner. So we look at the intercompany partner. I've switched off the auto accepting transactions and I have switched off the auto sending transactions. So when we do the first transaction we're going to do, we'll step it through the intercompany outbox in the sending company and the intercompany inbox in the receiving company. You can see what's going on. So we're selling a service to the EU company, and there's my EU vendor. Healthy balance now because I've done lots of testing. And we open a new document for them. You can see there they've got their intercompany partner code set up. And we'll just do a sales invoice. The sharing with Teams and the slowness thereof. Fantastic. Okay, so we'll do this for a GL code. And I know which GL number it is because I've tested it a million times. And let's just call it Bootcamp Demo. And I'll do. Okay, so there's our invoice all ready to go. And I will just post that, and that's all I do. Yes, please, I'd love to post the invoice. No, thank you. I would rather not see it again. Thank you very much. Okay, so let's just go and have a look at the intercompany outbox. So there are two outboxes. You've got an intercompany outbox, and that's for the stuff that is waiting to get sent. And then if you've ticked the little buttons in the setup, and they get passed straight through, you've got a record of all the transactions that have been passed straight through. So once I've processed the one in the outbox, it'll move into the handled intercompany outbox transactions list. Okay, so here's my sales invoice sat there in the outbox waiting to go. And I can carry out line actions, which is a fairly standard function all over BC. And the line action is here, and you've got a number of choices there. I can have a look at the outbox transaction, and we'll just do that quickly. So this is basically an uneditable invoice. You can view dimensions and indeed even set dimensions. In fact, I might do that just now, in fact. But you can see already what it's done. The original invoice was to 10100. So it's gone to the GL account on this company, and it knows that the intercompany partner reference on that GL account is 31200. So it's passing that already through as a transaction to a different GL account. Okay, let's stick a couple of dimensions on just so that I can show you the dimensions flowing through as well. I should probably have set these up on the customer, but I didn't. Okay, well, let's say it's industrial. All right. Okay, I'll close that. And then we can use the actions. So the actions here on the ribbon are the same as the actions here in the drop down, but they allow you to just go, if I click send to intercompany partner, it would be the same as if that line action was set to send to intercompany partner and I clicked functions and carry out line actions. So if I do that, it will go off, and there you go, it's empty, and it is now in, it's now in my handled intercompany outbox transactions. There it is down there at the bottom, number 16. Just in case you doubted me, there's our fella there, our bootcamp demo. Okay, so if we nip across into the EU company and look at the inbox, we will see here's transaction number 16 waiting for us in the inbox, and we can go and have a look at it. And it is still showing for the intercompany partner reference 31200. That's the reference it's going to pass into the intercompany chart of accounts. Okay, so just bear that in mind. Our dimensions have been passed through, as you can see, so that's all great. And the same functionality exists here, same line actions here. So if I go actions and accept, it will just accept that and create a purchase invoice, which we'll see in a minute. Now, I can return it to the intercompany partner, I can cancel it, or I can take no action, come back to it later on in the day. And if you choose not to automate these things by clicking those booleans in the intercompany partner setup, then you can use the inbox to gather up a bunch of documents that have been arriving during the course of the day, and then go through them all and check them at the end of the day and decide that you're going to accept them. It's entirely down to how you want to monitor this kind of transaction coming in and out. So let's accept that. Oh my, that's slow. I took a drink of water while it's doing that. It's very much a sharing on Teams thing, isn't it? As soon as you start sharing things on Teams, everything grinds to a halt. Come on. Right, let's have a look. So we'll look at the handled inbox. I'm sure by now you believe that these things are going to appear. Handled intercompany inbox transactions. There it is, number 16. And that's our chap. Okay, it's still saying 31200. Okay, so that's been handled, and that's created a purchase invoice. Not a posted purchase invoice, it just creates the posted. It's not a posted purchase invoice, it's just a purchase invoice, which I think for me is a relief. I wouldn't want it posting something before I'd had a chance to check it in my company. So here are our purchase invoices, and here's our £999 invoice. And if we open this up, we will see that the invoice has been created to this GL account number, which is what I was expecting, and I will explain to you why that's happened. Let's have a look quickly at the dimensions. Yes, the dimensions have been passed across exactly as we wanted to, so that's great. And let's have a look at the intercompany inbox, and I'll show you. Not intercompany inbox, the intercompany chart of accounts. Okay, intercompany chart of accounts. So it was being passed through to repairs and maintenance, wasn't it? So the GL account in the sending company was GL account 10100. And on that GL account, the intercompany dimension, the intercompany chart of account number was set to this one because we were creating a purchase from the sale. But when it comes into the receiving company, it then takes a look at this mapping table and goes, well, actually, the one I really want to create the invoice to is this. And so that's how it does it. And that's how you can then manage companies that have got very different GL accounts and charts of accounts. So having gone through that, let's just, yeah, I want to exit. Let's just go back to the beginning, and I'm going to just tick all the buttons, and we'll just see it going through without any barriers. I really can't type. Intercompany partners. Okay, right. So let's auto accept transactions, and let's also send transactions. Okay. And then over here in the UK company, come on. Do exactly the same. Auto send and auto accept. Okay, and let's look at our customers. Here's Cronus, steadily building up their balance. Still, they haven't paid us yet, which is very annoying. New document, sales invoice. Okay, and I'm just going to post it. Yes, please. No, thank you. Okay, if I go to the EU company, actually, I don't need to do that. Just go purchase invoices there. Go away. Oh, that wasn't what I wanted to do at all. Purchase invoices. And here's the invoice. Bam. Just created without anyone having to do anything at all. So when it works smoothly, it works wonderfully. And that's terrific. The issues can be, so the reason I managed to dig into this as deeply as I've managed to dig into it and get my head around it the way I have is because I had a client come to me about 8 months ago, and they have over 60 companies on their database. And all of those 60 companies pretty much are all trading with each other. And they found that they were getting into a terrible tangle. And what they were basically saying to me was that the intercompany functionality in Business Central was rubbish. And of course, I thought, well, there's just no way it can possibly be rubbish. So let's go and unpick what they've done and see what's going on. The issue they had was they were continually having to intervene and manually key things, and it wasn't working. And what was occurring was that they have big staff, and you would have somebody who was responsible for setting up intercompany in the UK company, for example, and somebody else who was responsible for setting it up in the EU company, and they just weren't talking to each other. And they weren't aware that in order to be able to make it work, both sides of the fence needed to be exactly the same. And that was my main troubleshooting tip, is when you have a client phone you up and tell you that intercompany is not working, you can almost guarantee that it's the people that's the problem, not the software, and that there's a missing part of the setup somewhere along the way. Okay, so that is pretty much it. I think I may have got us back on track with a slightly shorter presentation, but it's nowhere near as detailed as Dimensions. So, the one thing I was going to show you, actually, just very quickly. So when I went to set this up, I proposed that I would do this session a while ago, and so I did a demo in my sandbox and set it up and ran through it a number of times and did all the setup and made sure I'd recorded it all and all that other kind of stuff. And then I went away on holiday, and then I came back from holiday, and this weekend I thought, just going to go and check everything, make sure it's all right. And both of my sandbox environment had become inactive, and I couldn't get it restarted, so I had to restart absolutely everything. I had to create a new sandbox. And when I created the new sandbox, I discovered this, and you probably will have seen this. Company information, open new intercompany setup page. And I thought, oh God, they've changed it. what a nightmare. But they haven't changed it actually. So I went and created another sandbox elsewhere. And if I go into the intercompany information and just go to company information and open the setup page, it's basically the same as the other intercompany setup page, but it's got a couple more fields here to allow you to create, flag up a default intercompany general journal template and a default intercompany general journal batch. So luckily, they hadn't changed absolutely everything. They had literally just added some extra stuff, which was great. So there you go. So not missed out on anything. So that's me. Any questions? I'm on Twitter under Matthew Perrin 1. I have a blog which I occasionally post to where I've learned something new, and I really feel like I need to record it for myself in a place that I can look it up and then share it with other people. And I'm also on the BC Professional server on Discord, which I recommend everybody joins. I've had tremendous amount of help from lots of people, either both on Twitter or on Discord, and I've made some great friends all across the world who've given me tons of help when I've had problems. And that's one of the things that comes out of being freelance, is you end up with friends everywhere, which is great. Okay, thank you all very much. It has been pointed out I look like Shrek in that picture because of the little Business Central bone going through my head. So if anyone wants to ask Shrek a question about Intercompany, then feel free.
Thank you, Matthew. Always a great pleasure. Your sessions always go down really well, just because you break it down so well and so humbly, to be honest. So we always really appreciate you, and you've covered a great important topic today. Obviously, if customers are struggling with it, then they're doing something wrong, and you've kind of uncovered and unpicked that. So thank you for sharing your insight there. There are a couple of questions here in the chat. There is a question by Akash, I think Sunil actually, which was to do with why global dimension field is not created in sales and purchase header table and only in the shortcut dimension 1 and 2, but that's to do with the previous session. So the next session,
you feel my heart sinking there.
Yeah, so the next one is more relevant to yours, which is, how do you set up a subsidiary that has a totally different business activity? One has retail product sales and inventory, and one has raw materials and sells by projects and services.
That's an excellent question, and I don't know the answer to it because I've never gone and tinkered to that level of detail. So the great thing about this is that you don't have to do it via sales invoice. You can actually do it via orders or journals, and quite a lot of people do it just via journal. So partly that would be an internal discussion about how you wanted to transact between the two companies. I'm presuming that what the questioner is asking is if they're not sharing inventory codes and inventory items, how do you sell between one and the other? But I would assume that if you're selling an inventory item to another company in the same database, then you will be selling an item for an item to an item. But it depends whether the receiving company is using stock management or not. So yeah, that's one to go and tinker with in a sandbox somewhere and don't damage anything. But yeah, I'm afraid I can't answer that question because that's quite complex.
And just to add to that, Matthew, you're right, it is complex, and that's often where you need to use finance and operations sometimes when you're dealing with large organizations with subsidiary complexities. But I'm sure it can be done in Business Central. But I'm sure we'll get that question answered very shortly. The next question by IK is, can once sending company have multiple partners?
Yes, absolutely. So essentially, this ends up looking really complicated because you have, so as I said, my client's got 60 companies, and the biggest ones are trading with maybe 40 of the other companies in the database, and some of them are only trading with 2 or 3, and some just 1 or 2, and some not at all. But the biggest ones are trading with 40 or 50 companies. So what you're doing is you're setting up an intercompany partner for every single entity that you're trading with. So if you're trading with 50 companies, you've got to have 50 intercompany partners. And at the other end, on the other company, they have to have an intercompany partner for you. The intercompany chart of accounts needs to be agreed between everybody in that network. So you basically, if you've got a whole group of intercompany, a whole group of companies all in one database, somebody at some point or another has to slam their fist down on the table and say, this is the GL codes we're using for the intercompany chart of accounts, because that has to be uniform across everybody. So the intercompany chart of accounts is uniform, but the GL codes that you map them to in the receiving companies can be are going to be the GL codes that you've got in that receiving company.
Thank you. So Hani is asking, what other journals pages can be sent? General journals, banking deposits?
So I've done it with sales orders, purchase orders, general journals, sales invoices, purchase invoices. Given that all journals in Business Central are ultimately really just general journals that have been dressed up in fancy clothes, I assume that all of them can be sent. Never tried, but I would assume that all of them can be sent, because they are basically a cash receipt journal is basically a general journal, isn't it?
Great. So let's have a look. Okay, I think there's a couple of final questions there. So IK is also asking, do dimensions also move over between sending company and the partner?
Yes, they do. They do.
Okay.
So yeah, so if you set the dimensions in the sending company, you set the dimensions on the transaction in the sending company in the normal way, so they would be inherited from items or GL accounts or customers or vendors or whatever. Then those are passed from the sending company into the intercompany kind of transaction kind of bit in the middle. And it's the dimensions of the sending company are the ones that are passed. When that gets picked up at the other end, it's the intercompany dimension. So that dimension code is mapping to an intercompany dimension code at the other end, and that's picking that up and then applying the dimension that's corresponding to that in the receiving company. So the mapping is slightly different from the intercompany chart of accounts, in that you've got on the sending company, you've got a dimension and an intercompany dimension. And on the receiving company, you've got the same, but it's reading it the other way around. So it's taking the intercompany dimension and mapping it to the dimension in the existing company, in the receiving company.
Great stuff. So Jane Nadine is asking, how do we combine all entities of the group incorporated in the different countries in one consolidated report, mainly for consolidation of FS?
Well, you would set up, that's consolidation is a slightly different thing. But you would set up a consolidation company to do that. I mean, it's not too onerous to set up actually consolidation, and it might be, maybe that's what I'll do next year, is do a thing on consolidation instead. So there's two ways of doing it. The other thing I do, I should have mentioned at the beginning, is that I mainly do BC, but I do quite a lot of work with Jet Reports and Jet Analytics and Power BI. I do that in Jet myself. And all my colleagues are going to shoot me now for saying that it shouldn't be done in Business Central. It probably should be done in Business Central, but you can set up a consolidation company in Business Central, which you can either consolidate groups of companies on the same database, or you can consolidate the entire database into one consolidation company. It's entirely up to you.
So Sajid is asking, how can I assign more than one intercompany to a single company?
Via the intercompany partners. So if you've got like a parent company, for example, and it's got two subsidiaries with which it's trading, the parent company would have two intercompany partners, one for each of the receiving companies, the companies with which it's trading. And assuming the subsidiaries are not trading with each other, they would only have a single intercompany partner going back to the parent.
So Sal's asking, if I have the same customer in both company and I prefer handling sales, invoices and payments of both from one company using the IC. So, yeah.
I'm not sure I understand that really.
Yeah, I'm not completely sure.
I kind of see what you mean. So one of the things, so you kind of raises an interesting point about intercompany dimensions. So the client that I was talking about earlier on, they share a dimension set across all 60 companies. So they've made it quite straightforward for themselves because they have things like project codes and cost center codes and things like that they share. And they also have approval groups that they have dimension codes for, and those are kind of universal across the entire estate. But one thing they can't share via dimension is customers and vendors, because obviously if you've got a company in South Africa and a company in Inverness, they're not going to have the same, they're not going to be getting their roof fixed by the same guy. So they're not going to share customers and vendors. So what they do is they map all of their customer dimension codes to a single intercompany, a single generic intercompany customer. And so when that gets passed through onto the receiving company, it just carries an intercompany customer number, just a single vendor, a single dimension code. So that's one way in which the dimensions are kind of used to not be identical in both sides. Don't know if that was
So
clear.
Alfredo,
that garbled.
Yeah, no, that's great, Matthew. So Alfredo's asking, can I set up a dedicated exchange rate for intercompany transactions in foreign currencies?
Yeah, so what you'd need to do if you're going to do that in foreign currencies is you really need to kind of schedule that when you're going to update your currency exchange rates, your FX rates. And then what most people I've seen do with this is they have a report that they generate that does all the exchange rates on it. And then they will load that into the parent company and then send that round everybody, and they all know to update their exchange rates on the same day. So you've got everybody using the same exchange rates across the piece. And they use a jet reporting, jet analytics data warehouse to monitor the performance of the entire group. So it's one of the checks they do each month is whether that piece of work's been done by everybody, because they can see exactly what the exchange rates are company by company.
So Sajid is asking if the dimension values will be transferred to intercompany transaction.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah, they are. So, for example, if you've got a purchase invoice and you're passing that across, and it's got dimensions on the header, but it's also got a slightly different set of dimensions on the line, it'll pass both the header and the line dimensions across.
Right. So Steve Chinsky is online, and he's also mentioned the consolidated company will take each business unit, sister companies, and using the consolidated account number and merge them into a consolidated company, taking into account currency translation. Fantastic. Thank you there, Steve. So, okay. And then Steve's also mentioning intercompany partners can have their own currency, i.e. customer or vendor. So Alfredo is mentioning in response, yes, but can I have a different Europe rate for an intercompany invoice that is different from the rate I use for normal transactions? Whereas Steve mentions you can change the individual rate on the actual invoice by clicking on the currency to alter the rate pulled from the exchange rate table. So the next question by Nato is, are you able to make high-level consolidations and eliminations in JET reports? For example, removing intercompany revenue or depreciation for intercompany FA purchases and etc.
Yeah, I mean, if it's recorded in Business Central, you can report it through JET. If it's recorded in a table somewhere, it can be reported in JET or Power BI or SQL or wherever else you want to do your reporting. Yes.
Okay, final question by Ranjit, who's asking, how can we manage group companies operating from different geographical areas, especially the different localizations in Business Central?
That's a good question. I'd need to kind of know specifically what you had in mind, because I think the main issues really are the ones that I've covered today. When you get into localizations, you're getting into things like sales tax and things like that, aren't you? So one of the things I'm thinking of is that I've got a customer who's got a US subsidiary, who are obviously, they're dealing with sales tax, and we've just done an implementation for them. So you're having to do the entirety of the implementation, having lived with VAT all your life without actually doing anything with VAT, and trying to do something completely different, which is a bit of a nightmare. But what's happening though is okay, I'm going to guess slightly here because I haven't tested this, but what's happening is you're passing a transaction into a company that's got a setup in a certain way and got certain tax rates and codes and things set up, and it's going to pass that through. I would think that it's going to pass that through in the same way as it would if you created the invoice in that company. But I am speculating slightly there, so you'd need to test that.
Well, you've timed everything perfectly today, Matthew, because we are on the hour now. So I just want to give you a huge round of applause, because to be honest, Matthew, it's always great fun having you on. You've covered a very important topic, very practical issues. Could you please share or in fact, I can share it in the chat if you don't have access to the chat, but if you could share your contact details and blog so that the community can keep in touch. I'm sure we'll be seeing you. I definitely want to see you again in person, hopefully next year. That'd be fantastic.
Fingers crossed. Okay, that's great.
Thank you once again, Matthew. There you go, guys.
Right.
If you've not,
cheers then.
Thank you, Matthew, once again. Excellent stuff. So that was Matthew.